We are at week 5 with aging and mental health. This week is a little repetitive because we're going over chapter 4, and a lot of these things we discussed in the material that you saw in the video. But I'm just going to go over this briefly, and then we're going to get into chapter 5. So, again, the absolute lifespan is the maximum possible chronological age that a human can live. So, that could be up to 120 years. That could be much shorter. The mean human lifespan is the age by which 50% of humans have died. So most humans, they have reached at least the age of 65. Um, there's normal signs of aging, elasticity in your skin, graying hair, weight gain. There might be different changes as far as like how your bone density may be, your immune system, that you may not be able to see that from a person by just looking at them, but that could be some things that are going on. Um, Slower reactions to things, visual acuity. Again, you may not be able to tell those things by just looking at a person. Health status of the aged has improved markedly. Like if you think of modern research, modern medicine, preventative care, there's more people aging, so there's more things out there for the aging. These are things that affect the aging community and have caused the increase of people living. Activities of daily living, so washing our hair, feeding ourselves, dressing, and taking a bath. Instrumental activities of daily living, light housework, preparing food, shopping for groceries, managing money. These may be things that we may see change as people get older in the sense of what they can do for themselves and what they can't do for themselves, whether it be actual feeding, dressing, taking a bath, or maybe getting out of the house. It's a little bit more difficult. Um, Chronic and acute conditions of aging. So, acute conditions are short term illnesses, flu, strep throat. Chronic illnesses are more like things that, like hypertension, high blood pressure, um, an illness that isn't going to go away. Some of them are preventable. So, you know, for example, if you maybe eat healthier, you may not be as likely to have hypertension, or if you don't smoke, you may not get heart disease, things of that nature. But there are some simple guidelines to them. About 75% of all deaths are caused by heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Probably not a huge shock to any of you. Sorry, I skipped a slide. Okay, so let's scroll. I just scrolled down to accidents. 1/3 of American elders fall each year. So that causes them to go to the hospital. They're a cause of death. We think of hip fractures. Oftentimes, if an older person breaks a hip, that can cause a huge decline in their livelihood. Obesity has risen. Those with lower incomes and less education have higher rates. Mortality, so there's a lot of problems due to obesity, and that causes a risk factor for heart disease, diabetes, and depression. Not able to do as much, maybe because you can't get around as easily, not to mention stroke. So obesity does play a role in a person's mortality. We learned a lot about this in the video that we watched. The maximum lifespan is the greatest age, and again, the greatest age that we know of is 122. The average lifespan is, again, 80 for humans. Aging is a result of accumulated errors. So, free radicals, highly reactive molecules in the body that damage cells. Certain people seem more vulnerable than other. Antioxidants absorb free radicals and are present in a lot of our food. There for a while, the acai berry, was really popular. Blueberries have antioxidants, those things that help keep us young, and help like the deterioration of our cells. Aging is driven by a genetically regulated process. So, like, aging looks very different for very different people, depending on your culture, um, depending on your ethnicity, culture, vocation, how quickly or slowly a person may age. Um, Biologically, we're given a certain amount of time. But we have the choice on how we use that time. When you get older, your immune system changes. Uh, a lot of autoimmune conditions come out as people get older. So things like, lupus, things like, what is it? I'm going with fibromyalgia, things like that, neuropathy that aren't necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily see them before, but as you get older, they show their ugly face. So our mental health, things may change with how we feel about ourselves, and we're going to get into this more as class continues. But clearly, as you get older, you might start to get a little depressed. You can't do the same things that you were used to. So aerobic exercise could help with that. Being happy, optimistic helps with longevity. Dealing with things from your past, so dealing with issues, dealing with forgiveness, dealing with anger, and being able to laugh at yourself. If you can't laugh at yourself, sometimes things are really sad. So having a good attitude and just being able to laugh it off may help people as they get older, and maybe not be so critical or hard on themselves when things aren't going necessarily the way that they would like. So some of our life is sometimes shortened by where we live, by the air quality. Think of big cities. I think of Beijing when the Olympics was there, and we saw the air quality that affects people. In farming communities, you'll see people are dealing with a lot of health concerns due to pesticides that they've been around. If you decide to be a smoker, or if you live with a smoker, you know, living conditions. So let's say a person is divorced, or they go through a loss of a significant other or a child. Those things can pay a huge toll on a person. My grandmother always used to say that my great great aunt lived so long because she never had kids, and she always looked so young because she never had kids. The worry and the stress that children caused, it caused her to not look as old. Um, Life is lengthened though by a stimulating environment. So how active you stay, how mentally challenged you stay, um, those kinds of things can help you in your longevity. And two, what you can afford. If you have more things at your fingertips that you can do to help yourself, you're able to maybe challenge yourself more. When you don't have like necessarily the income or the ability, it may be a little bit more difficult. So this is some things that they've noticed from people who are centenarians. So centenarians are like people who have lived for a very, very long time, to 100. So assertive and forceful, high on dominance, low on conformity. So people who are like leaders, high on problem solving but lower on intelligence, likely to use religion as a coping device. They're moderate, healthy eaters. So you'll see some. I always think of the Today Show, and Willard Scott gets on there and shows the grandma who's 101 years old, and she's gone to church her whole life and she still plays in the choir. Or you'll see the man who has a drink of whiskey every day, and that's something he says. It can look very different for every type of person, but these are some things that these people who have lived a long time have attributed their life to. The correlation between chronological age and depression. So physical factors, predisposition, constant pain, major health issues, that's going to affect how you feel about yourself. Fear of death, unfinished business, things of that's going to affect how you feel about yourself. Medication may cause depression. And then, of course, personality factors, how you feel about yourself, what you were able to do versus what you can do now. Memory changes, complaints. People get older and then they start to forget things, and that may make a person very sad. They may start to forget the people that they know, or they can't remember things that were significant to them. So these are things that affect mood and affect how a person feels about themselves. A person with positive mental health has a high cognitive performance, is associated with education, strenuous activity, peak pulmonary flow, and a strong sense of self. Education, so always trying to learn, helps a person feel good about themselves. Of course, if you can avoid disease and disability, that's going to make you feel great. And engaging in life, participating. A lot of older people sometimes stop and they give up. So being willing to be part of things helps. So anxiety can start, nervousness, tension, dreading the future. No age difference found, but anxiety disorders can be debilitating for elders. Yes, I think of older people who start to feel unsafe. They don't want to go outside after dark because they don't want to drive on the freeway anymore and things like that. And then they get more locked into their home or their environment, and they're not exposed to things that may stimulate them, and because they're so anxious and nervous about everything. Maybe a loved one that they used to do everything with is no longer with them. So there's a fear of like, I'm by myself. And that can cause a lot of anxiety for a person. Very typically, you can see things like generalized anxiety disorder, which is just general anxiety. You have obsessive compulsive disorder, which they use the generic example of hand washing, but you could have obsessive compulsive thoughts. You can't get something off your mind. A phobia, specific fears such as death, dying, illness. There's people who are always waiting to get a terrible illness, and that's a terrible way to live your life. I think of this whole obsessive compulsive disorder, and I think of the person who's constantly worrying that their money's going to go away, and they almost obsess over it, looking at it all the time, checking maybe with a financial planner. And that might be a person who's aging and already went through the depression. So money and the loss of money is very scary and has been a very real thing. And you'll see this come out sometimes in older people. So, personality disorders also can be a factor. Um, Ways of living that haven't necessarily been healthy. Some as they get older, they may become more paranoid, maybe due to a life experience, being afraid of the outside world and how overwhelming it is. They may become more introverted, antisocial, like I mentioned, just staying in their environment. There might be also some personality disorders that have always been there, but maybe now they're more clear as they've gotten older because they've had maybe not so healthy ways coping with people. I'll say a narcissist. A narcissist has probably been a narcissist for quite some time, but maybe it's more obvious as the person has gotten older. It's all about them. A borderline personality person with borderline personality disorder, they've probably had that disorder for a very long time, but now it's more clear as maybe the children are dealing with some major difficulties with how the adult is behaving. So mental disorders that are organic. So if those kinds of things affect your mental functioning, affects about 11% of older adults. Approximately 6% of Americans over 65 have severe intellectual impairment based on physical causes. So that affects you when you can't function the way that you're used to functioning. You think of Alzheimer's and how debilitating it is for the person, let alone for the family member. And that's an organic brain problem. I think Barbara mentioned a video just recently that was not a video, but something that was shown on 60 Minutes about Alzheimer's. That might be something you'd be interested in checking out. It's an epidemic in our society, and it's so hard to watch a person deteriorate in that way. Alzheimer's affects more than 4 million people in the US. How sad. That's so sad. Um, it doesn't appear to be increasing. The prevalence has increased, though, however, and more common among women than men. I think they say that there are some things that you can do for it as far as for preventative, but there's a loss of cognitive function, a decline in self care, inappropriate social behavior, catastrophic reactions to things. It's very scary for a person who's dealing with Alzheimer's. Um, they try to improve functioning, slowing progression, and helping the family cope. This is where, as a therapist, that might be your role, is helping the family cope with the loss and the mourning that starts when the person has been even diagnosed. A person can live from 2 to 20 years. Um, Late dementia can be very hard because a person can literally forget to swallow. Some of you may have experienced this with family members already. Um, there's other forms of dementia. It might be due to blood flow. Um, it could be just there's some confusion. I know my great grandmother, she choked, and when she choked, she lost oxygen to her brain. And after that, it was like she very clearly had dementia. The brain is very sensitive and a very unique organ. Alcoholism may cause some things. There's other degenerative brain diseases that aren't Alzheimer's, but that could cause dementia. Um, Parkinson's and Huntington disease are other examples of organic disorders that cause, again, tremors, rigidity of movement. Huntington disease can happen for people at a very young age. The mentally ill seem to benefit from activities to remain busy, activities to engage in the community, and effective programs, in-home treatment, community networks, and peer counseling. Again, a huge role being a therapist in helping the mental health of the elderly community. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me or call. And I hope you find this information interesting and hopefully it will be useful for you in your future practice.